So yeah, I thought I'd do a video on. I think I'm going to do a video about Manchester and the question of is it our second city? No, in England. Yeah, more England rather than the UK. Where I think there's three big cities that you can say are in England that stand out. Like obviously London, which is our capital, and Birmingham, which is seen as our second biggest city, I guess. That's probably based on population and the larger borough, I guess you can call it, where that's seen as our second city. Then I think the third one's on Manchester, but I think with Manchester, like you can argue that that's our second city. Like I don't know about size on like the land it takes, like the surrounding areas in the borough, but probably more on the cultural influence. Where I feel like culturally, when it comes to modern culture, especially, and probably throughout history, that Manchester is more of an influential city, and so that, in my eyes, makes it kind of a bigger city in a way. Where outside of London, it's probably the only city in England, probably in the UK, but especially in England outside of London, that has like a cultural influence on people, and I'd say especially the modern age. And yeah, I'm not usually a big fan of the big city and town centres, no, especially with these smaller satellite towns where they're usually shitholes. There's a lot of empty shops, and if there is any shops, it's the wrong kind of shops, no money laundering sort of shops, no like vaping shops, betting shops, and chicken shops, and just all this shit that kind of, I think, ruins the high street. And other than that, you might get the odd Poundland and fucking British Art Foundation, which I guess like charity shops isn't a bad thing because you'd think they're a good cause for a good cause, but I don't know. There's probably a bit of questionable debate on where the money goes when it comes to these charity shops and stuff. But personally, I just find they're not for me. I just think they're soulless. It drains the soul out of you and the energy out of you. I find them depressing, and that might have something to do with the rise of homelessness and the the drug scene on the streets, and people like crackheads being smacked out of their head, and just fucking, at the end of the day, I just find it depressing. And that's certainly a thing in Manchester, where it probably is the worst place for that, maybe in England. And I think it's just something that's spread across the country like the plague, and I blame the government at the end of the day. And but I guess like there's pockets of good, especially with these big major cities that have got a lot of money, where they can probably actually, they've got more stuff about it, where they can keep shops open for one, and you might get more interesting kind of places in these big major cities, especially like London and Manchester, probably like places like Bristol and I don't know, like in Cambridge or wherever, well, what have you. But I'd say like Manchester, with coming with to the cultural influence, probably is the second biggest city for me in the UK. And I'm gonna go and get into a few things why I think that is, and I think with like every major city, you're gonna get like more interesting things. Like we've got things like the Trafford Centre, which is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, shopping centre in Europe or England outside of London or whatever you were. It's a bit all posh, it's a bit all done up, it's quite clean, and I think you find you get a lot of celebrities going there as well, probably like people that are into that sort of stuff, like reality TV stars and all these Love Island types and all that, because they probably live in some of them probably live in Cheshire and all that, and married to like Man United players and all that. And other than that, when you go into the main city centre, you're going to get these weird, quirky places that they're a bit strange, they're a bit bizarre, but I guess that's what attracts the people to it. No, that sort of market where it's something a bit different, or quite a lot different actually. Nowhere you're just not gonna find it anywhere else, especially in these smaller towns like Rochdale and Bury and Oldham, where there's not a lot about it. Like you're gonna more likely find these weird, quirky places that you're more likely gonna find in like in the middle of fucking Tokyo or fucking New York or stuff you don't really find anywhere else. You know, like these ramen bars, these sushi bars, these sushi restaurants, Japanese sort of culture, Oriental sort of culture seems to be big. Where you're gonna get very weird, very cool, quirky places. You know, like you might get some like weird anime themed bar, no, that serves some quirky food. And to be honest, it sounds quite. Personally, I find that quite interesting. It sounds like a little bit of me, to be honest. But I do find Manchester to be a very chaotic, overcrowded place that just drains the energy out of me, and I just found it's just not really my kind of place anymore, and I've decided it's not really for me. I'd probably rather hang around in the smaller villages that seems can have some quite nice places in general. And other than that, you got a few other places, you know, like weird, quirky stuff. It's usually the Japanese Oriental sort of places, but you might get some like random restaurant, I guess, like I don't know what a good example is. Like I don't know, you might get a few like good Irish bars or something, but I guess you can get that anywhere really. Like as you might, I can imagine having there's going to be a large Irish community in these sort of areas, and these like when it comes to like street food, you're gonna get these more interesting, weird, quirky places like these weird taco places, Mexican places. You might get a weird, quirky burger place that does some funky burgers or what have you. And like these, I find you get like tons of these food halls that do interesting stuff, like these smaller, like hipster sort of burger bars and craft beer sort of bars, and it's quite interesting. I guess it's something that you'd only find in the big major cities, and especially in Manchester, where I just don't think you're going to find a lot of things outside of that. Where that's for my area, especially that's our big city, that's our major city, where it's about a 20-minute drive away from me, or 15 minutes on the train from the, you know. So if I'm going to go to like the town centre or a big city, I'd probably just go with Manchester or flirt with Liverpool instead, because it's a bit more rare for me. So I'd probably find a bit more enjoyment in Liverpool, to be honest. And other than that, like you got places like Media City, the BBC, that's based in Manchester. I don't think there's really anywhere else in the country other than London that really has stuff like that. As big as Media City, I think there's somewhere in Leeds where Channel 4's kind of based in Leeds, I think. Or they've got some sort of studio space there. But I don't think you're going to get somewhere as big as Media City that's got ITV, Channel 4, the BBC, and just the major hub. I think it's even the main hub for the media production in the UK, where they're all based in Manchester. So that's another part to why I'd say it has a cultural influence. And obviously you got the Manchester music scene where you got all these bands, like you got some of the most influential bands in the world, like I think the two big ones I can think of is like Joy Division, the Smiths, where they're kind of got a global influence, I guess, and New Order, which is basically just Joy Division, really, but without Ian Curtis. But a few others like Oasis probably never really quite cracked America, but I'd still say they're influential. They're a big influential band, especially at the minute with this comeback, and the Stone Roses, and I've got kind of a following, I guess, overseas and in America and all that, and a few others, like I don't know if I'd say the same for the like Happy Mondays or fucking got a few like Britpop sort of bands. I'd say they're good, but I don't know if they're as influential like the Charlatans and don't know James and fucking don't know a few others, especially in like the Northwest, I guess. Obviously, you got the Beatles and Liverpool, and which is like the most influential band in the world, I'd say, and many more like the Verve, kind of greater Manchester based, with Wigan and all that. And I think the big thing I'd say is that we seem to have a huge concert scene where I think outside of London, I think Manchester's probably the biggest city to host concerts nowhere. We've got a bunch of concert venues and we seem to be opening more, like you got Old Trafford, obviously the football side, and we've got two of the biggest clubs in England and in Europe based in Manchester, plus you got Liverpool as well, that's three if you're going to count the Northwest. But when it comes to concerts, you got Old Trafford, the fucking MEN Arena, and fucking you got this Co-op Live place now, and the Etihad, many more, and dunno, the Victoria Warehouse and all that, and there's plenty of them like O2 Academy, and you seem to host all these global bands now, like obviously had the Ariana Grande thing, which tragically was a terror attack at the end. Like, obviously that's a big concert. You're gonna host all these big global superstars, and I think outside of London, we're probably the main place to host all these stuff. Like, personally, I went to watch Vampire Weekend, who's probably got a global following, and probably not as big as like Ariana Grande, but quite global, I guess. And people from like, I think when it comes to like music and celebrity culture, in my opinion, America's dominant, probably because of like Hollywood and all that shit. But really, America's dominant for that, especially in the Western world, and they all come over here, where they've got a global following, all this K-pop sort of stuff is probably outside of that, and Britain seems to have all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think culturally, I think Manchester seems to have a bigger influence on society and probably in the world outside of London when it comes to that sort of stuff. So in a way, I think it kind of makes them our second city in a way, but I think that's more on influence rather than like population. But because I don't really know the stats for that, but I'd say they're in top three. Like we're at least third, I think, when it comes to that. When you're talking about population, but yeah, it's not my favourite place in the world. I think there's a lot of it's a bit of a shithole, I think, but I think a lot of these major cities are shitholes like New York, but I've kind of got a fascination with that for some reason, where there's pockets of good, I guess, when you got a bit of money, but I guess the money gets spent on the wrong things a lot of the time. But yeah, I think that's it for now. Goodbye.